Yep.
Good evening and welcome back to the second installment of our Saints update. It is May 13th, and I thank you all for coming. Hopefully, you've watched the previous one. If you have not, please check out the TUU Youth Update page run by Kathy Hamilton, or the parish pages that may also have this video, or the previous video rather. And I invite you all to watch that one. If you don't know what this is, it is the Saints Update. It is a small guide into the next or the coming week. And we look at the feast days that come up and we examine the lives in a short manner of each saint whose feast day comes up. This is not going to be like our Dead Theologians videos, which are a little bit more lengthy. And examining the saints, this is going to be a brief explanation, or as brief as I can make it. I invite you after the video is over to investigate for yourself the lives of these saints, or what is shown here today, and just learn more about them. You should always be learning about the saints because they are people we should be emulating and trying to follow, because they had a better relationship with God than most people have nowadays. So I invite you all to investigate this further. We'll begin on May 13th, which is today. It is the Feast of Our Lady of Fatima. Now, if you don't know the story of Our Lady of Fatima, this is going to be a brief explanation. In 1917, three Portuguese children received visions from Our Lady, or Mary. She asked them to pray for the end to World War I and the conversion and consecration of Russia. She revealed three secrets to them, and these would be revealed in time by Lucia dos Santos. The first secret involved devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The second vision was of hell. It was very distressing to the children when they received it. The third secret was of a bishop in white who was shot by a group of soldiers who fired bullets and arrows into him. Later on, this was thought to be a prophecy of the assassination attempt on St. John Paul II. But there are some who still believe that the third secret hasn't really been revealed, so there is some speculation on that part, but that is what the church has told us. Two of the children died by 1920, leaving the third child, Lucia dos Santos, to write down these prophecies. She became a Carmelite nun later in life, and she died in 2005 at the age of 97. So think about that. A woman who received visions of Mary and received these prophecies from her, died only 15 years ago. You know, she was here among us, and people could talk and interact with her. So it's not so far back that it's out of our reach. We can know it and know the world that she grew up in. The Feast of Our Lady of Fatima was approved by a local bishop in the 1930s, but it wasn't added to the church's worldwide calendar until 2002. This is a very special day in our Catholic calendar, and here is a painting of the appearance of Our Lady of Fatima. So, again, I invite you to investigate more on your own. The next day, we're going to perhaps my favorite apostle, St. Matthias the Apostle. His feast day is on May 14th. Not much is really known about Matthias. He's only mentioned at least once in the Bible. Peter and the other apostles need to fill the position that was left by Judas after his betrayal and suicide. Jesus chose 12 apostles to lead his church, and after his death and resurrection, there was only 11. So they needed someone to replace Judas. The choices came down to Matthias and Joseph called Barnabas. These two were important because they had been with Jesus through his entire mission. They had been with him from his baptism to his crucifixion and resurrection. So they knew Jesus, they knew how he preached, they knew his message, so they were the ideal choices. They drew lots, and Matthias won and was chosen. Again, not much is known about Matthias because he's not mentioned in the Bible specifically. Again, there's references to the 12 gathering or, preaching, but there's not specific mention of Matthias again in the Bible. But Clement of Alexandria says Matthias, like all the apostles, was not chosen by Jesus for what he already was, but for what Jesus foresaw he would become. And that's why he's my favorite one of the apostles. He wasn't, and they're all they were all chosen for the same reason as Clement of Alexandria just said, but he was chosen not because he was probably the best choice, but because he would become the apostle that they needed. Most of the apostles weren't public speakers to begin with. They were fishermen, they were hard workers, they were labormen. They weren't necessarily preachers, but through their interactions with Jesus, they were able to see and be empowered by the Holy Spirit, and they would become what the church needed them to be. So that's very much why he's my favorite apostle. And here's a sacred image of him. And now we move on to the next one. On May 15th, it is St. Isidore the Farmer. He is the patron saint of farmers in rural areas. Isidore entered the service of John de Vargas, a wealthy landowner from Madrid, and worked faithfully on his estate outside the city for the rest of his life. So unlike many of the other saints we've talked about so far, he very much stayed in one location but was able to do much in that one location. He married a young woman as simple and upright as himself, and she also became a saint, Maria de la Cabeza. They had one son who died early on in life. And he is a prime example and one you should look to about putting God in everything you do. All the day long, as he walked behind his plow or did his work, he communed with God. He actually made a lot of people on the farm upset many times because he would take so long in church interacting and praying to God. So he'd be late to work sometimes because he was having conversations with God. So again, he's just a prime example of how to keep God in your life. He died in May 15th, 1130, and was declared a saint in 1622 with Saint Ignatius of Loyola, Francis Xavier, Teresa of Avila, and Philip Neri. Together the group is known in Spain as the Five Saints. So he was associated with all these different saints who, again, we'll probably get into later, but all these saints did incredible things in their lives. So, to be included with this group of people just shows you how impactful of a life he had and how much people respected and loved him. And here's a painting of St. Ignatius, him praying on his farm. Again, you can see angels and a cattle plowing the field in the background. So if you know any farmers or live in a rural area, pray to St. Ignatius to help them out or to help your community out. On May 16th, we celebrate St. Margaret of Cortona. She was born to farming parents. Her birth mother died when she was only 7, and her father remarried. But very much, as we've seen, she was mistreated by her stepmother. She moved away and moved in with Arciano, a man, and although they weren't married, she did bear him a son, so she had a baby out of wedlock. It didn't bother her too much at first, but eventually it would. She waited for Arciano one day, and he didn't appear, and his dog actually appeared and brought her to his body that was found dead in the woods. And from that point on, she devoted her life to penance, to pain. She knew she sinned, and she wanted to repay God for that. Her son actually became a friar as he grew up. She became a Franciscan Trinitary. I apologize if I mispronounce anything. She pursued a life of prayer and penance at Cortona. Her confessor actually tried to have her ease up on the self-doubt and the self-hatred she had for herself. I shouldn't say self-hatred, but, her self-admonishment of herself. He tried to get her to, ease up on that. But she did, she did do that. And from there, she established a hospital and founded a congregation of Trinitary Sisters. She was canonized in 1782. And here is a painting of St. Margaret. Now we go to the next one. On May 17th, we celebrate St. Paschal Baylon. Between the ages of 7 and 24, he worked as a shepherd and began a life of mortification. If you don't know what that is, it's trying to deny the sinful nature of man. It's trying to suppress the more vile parts of ourselves, our You've heard 7 deadly sins, or if you know your own nature. You were greedy, were prideful. He tried very hard through his life to really repress that part of himself. He didn't want that. Instead, he wanted to focus on what was holy about him and what God had given him. So he began that life. Paschal joined the Friars Minor and gave himself wholeheartedly to a life of penance. So again, in a similar way to St. Margaret before, he knew, he believed, he didn't believe, he knew he was born with original sin. He knew that he had selfish and immoral desires, and he tried his entire life to push that away and suppress that. When he died, people flocked to his tomb immediately, and miracles were reported around the tomb. Paschal was canonized in 1690. It was named the patron of Eucharistic Congresses and Societies in 1897. And here's a painting of him. There we go on. The next one is St. John I, or I should say Pope St. John I. Pope John I became Pope during the time of the Arian heresy, which denied the divinity of Christ. So if you don't know what a heresy is an incorrect teaching on Christ or the church. And as it says, the Arian heresy was believing that Jesus was just man. There was nothing divine about him. So Pope St. John I was trying to combat that and trying to correct the false teaching. And during this time period where he became Pope, Christianity had only been tolerated in the Roman Empire for about 30 years or so. So it's still fairly in a new world, as it were. Many Christians or Catholics could still remember promptly the persecutions they suffered, and they probably still suffered a lot of persecutions even to this. But they had become more tolerated and more accepted in society. And so, again, he's combating this heresy. Well, the Eastern Emperor began imposing severe measures on those who believed this heresy in his area, and the Western Emperor forced John to head a delegation to the East to try to soften those measures. It was very much sort of, in a way, a mercy mission. He was trying to keep the Eastern Emperor from being too harsh on these people. Yes, they were believing something that's false, but he may have been harming them or even perhaps killing them, and St. John I was trying to stop that. Well, on his way back, he was actually imprisoned by the Western Emperor because the Emperor feared that St. John I was becoming too familiar with his Eastern counterparts and was afraid that he was trying to conspire against his throne and against him and try to stage a coup. He died shortly after he was incarcerated, and many believe it was due to his harsh treatment in the prison. So again, he was persecuted for his faith, he was persecuted because of who he was, but in the end, he died for his beliefs. I couldn't find an image of him, so rather we have the papal seal, because he was a pope, and he died, serving the church. This is the saint we celebrate on May 19th is Saint Theophilus of Corte. Theophilus was born in Corsica to rich and noble parents. As a young man, he entered the Franciscan order and soon showed his love for solitude and prayer. So even though he was born to a life of comfort and luxury, he still found it within himself to break away from that, and found the life of a Franciscan to be very enriching, very empowering. So that's where he wanted to go. He was inspired by the austere life of Franciscans, and he founded other such houses in Corsica and Tuscany. So he not only found peace for himself, but he also wanted to find peace for others. So he founded many houses and places for people to learn to live the life that he had lived. Theophilus graciously served the needs of God, the needs of God's people in the confessional, in the sick room, at the graveside. So he was there for the weakest among them. He was there for people who were spiritually sick, for people who were actually sick, and then he was there for people who had passed on and was praying for their souls. He died in June 17th, 1740. He was canonized in 1930. And there's an image of St. Theophilus. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this evening. I hope I didn't talk too fast and you all enjoyed this video. Again, the first one is already up. I invite you to go watch this, and I hope you enjoyed this video as well. Again, we'll be doing this every Wednesday, and I invite you to watch the next video. If you have not watched the video we published on Monday, I invite you to do that as well. And let me know what saints you'd like to hear about. We might include them in the next video, or we might do another Death Theologians on them. But let me know what you think in the comment section below, and thank you for your support. Thank you, and God bless.